A. So let's get the page here. We're towards the bottom of the page. We're learning about the different, what happens to last week we finished off with the animals that belong to an Ir Hanidachas. And we also discussed partnerships with the partnerships of peoples that have property in the Ir Hanidachas, in the city of idol worship, etc. How to be work it out. So that was last week. So we're middle of different things that are owned by peoples, whether they're the righteous people of the city, because like we learned last week, the people's products that are even the righteous possessions that are in the city get burnt. Only if they're outside the city, they get saved. The reason we were given is because that the reason they stay in the city that they shouldn't be in is because of their rechush, is because of what they possessed. So therefore they stayed, and therefore the money gets burnt as well. Like we're learning now the story of Lot of this week, that he wanted to be wealthy, so he lived in Stone, so he suffered with whatever happened in Stone. Okay, now the question is like this. The Gemara says, challenges the question. Bari Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asked the question, Seyar Noshim Tzidkaniyais Mahu. What do we do with the hair of the pious woman? So the women that belong to the families or the peoples that didn't serve idols in the Ir Hanidachas. So in general, like we said, even the righteous people, what does it mean righteous? The people that did not serve idols. So even though they didn't serve idols, their possessions get burnt with the rest of the possessions that are in the city. So the question is about the hair. What about the hair that belongs to the woman? Do they cut off the hair because there's a value there? Seemingly that's the question, and burn it with the rest of the possessions of the city. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava. Rava first, hey Barbara, we're holding 112a. So asking a question about the city, Ir Hanidachas, the city of idol worship. Does the hair of the righteous woman, does it get taken off? That's seemingly the question, and burnt with the rest of the possessions, because the righteous people's possessions in the city get burnt, and it could be the hair of the woman. Seemingly the question is something of value and should be considered like a possession. That's seemingly the question. So Amar Rava, but Rava wants to figure out the question. So why do you word this question? Are you convinced that the question is, the challenge is only with regard to the, so to say, the pious woman's hair, but the ones that belong to the hair that belongs to the people that are going to be killed, they get beheaded. So they're going to be killed. The righteous women don't get killed. But do you cut off the hair of it's obvious to you that you would cut off the hair of the woman that get beheaded and burn it with the rest of the possessions of the city? So the Rava says there's no basis for this. Why? Because it says tikboitz visarafta. Tikboitz means that you should gather and burn. Gather all the possessions of the city and burn it. This comes to indicate that the only thing that's lacking is to just gather what is ready to be gathered and to burn it. This excludes right? There's no question you're not going to burn the heads of the women that are beheaded, so you'd have to cut off the hair. So then there's three things that are lacking. You have to gather, burn, and talisha you have to cut off. You have to disconnect, detach. The hair was on the woman's head. So there's no basis for what's the question? So there's not even a question for the wicked woman. So why would you ask a question on the righteous woman? So, hypothetically, if you're just going to take the question face value, you could say there's a difference, because the women that are wicked get beheaded. So maybe there would, in theory, if not for the exclusion of the word talisha, that it says tikvois v'sarafta. From this, we learn that we exclude anything that's lacking to be detached. So then you would think to cut the hair off the wicked woman and burn it. And the question would be about the women that don't get burned, don't get beheaded. So do we cut off their hair because it's a value? But the Gemara doesn't accept that to be a question, because the pasuk excludes any need to detach. So therefore, we would definitely not take off the hair of the wicked woman. So why would we take off the hair of the righteous woman? But it's only because we have a limud, only because we have a pasuk. If not for the pasuk to teach us that detaching is not required. So then there would be a thought to say that surely the wicked woman we would detach their hair and burn it, and possibly the righteous woman we would detach their hair as well, means cut off their hair while they're alive and burn it with the rest of the possessions of the city. So the Rashi says, "Sari nashim tzidkaniyos Ir Hanidachas mahu." The hair of the righteous woman of a city of idol worship. What do we do with the hair? Is the hair of a woman considered almost like a possession that even though it's connected to her head, that we would cut it off and burn it? That's what we call in the Gemara the havamina, the thought of the question. So Rava says, 1 second. Rishanias pshitilach disarfim shalir. You're asking about the righteous woman because it's obvious to you that the wicked woman we would cut their hair off. Okay, so he says no. Why? Because we have a limud. You have to remember something, that the limud is the pasuk, which says, "Hey, Shuki, we're just going through the next scenario of questions about different possessions. Do they get burnt or not with the shalal, with the spoils of the city?" So here we're asking, then we're holding the Havamin in the question that wants to know about the hair of the righteous woman. That do we basically cut off the hair of the righteous woman and burn it with the rest of the possessions of the city? And Rava says, what do you mean? We have a pasuk, and the pasuk comes to teach us that only things that can be gathered without detaching. If you have to detach it, that's another, so to say, effort that you have to do, and the pasuk doesn't require you to detach something. Detach means that you leave something over, right? So you're leaving over the thing that you're detaching it from. We have the same ideas in a lot of great places of Torah. When you have the yadayim, the things that are connected, handles or stuff, how do they connect when it comes to tum and tara? If you touch a handle of a pot, does it make the pot tummy? So talisha shetzarach legalcha, you have to shave her head off. So the pasuk is coming to say that we wouldn't shave the head off. But again, if not for the pasuk, there could be a question to shave the heads of the righteous woman and burn it with the possessions of the city. The basis of it sounds biblical, but the basis of it is, till today, women are selling their hair for wigs. There's people who grow their hair. Some people do it as a charity. There's a lot of young girls that are giving their hair away to make wigs for cancer patients. That's something that I know a lot of teenager girls are doing. They're growing their hair very long and they cut it short and give it away to wig makers to make it for women who have cancer. And some people who are doing it for income. And especially in poor countries, there was a whole story many years ago at the hair of women in India that were being used for wigs for religious Jewish women. So it's a commodity. It's something that has value, and therefore there's a question. There's a thought. If not for the pasuk that says talisha, that you don't have to detach, then there would be a thought to have the woman shave their hair and burn it, even the righteous one. So, but here the Reb Steinsaltz quotes the Rambam that says, deriving benefit from hair of the male and female inhabitants of the idolatrous city is permitted. Means so the Rambam learns a step further. That means that a person could actually sell the hair or use it, make a wig out of it. Right? Might as well, kind of thing. So the Rava says, no, that's not the question. But because we have a special pasuk that says that the wording was tikboitz v'sarafta, only to gather and burn, but not to gather, disconnect, detach, and burn. So therefore, we can't be talking about hair. So what are we talking about? So we're talking about wigs. They pay a nachris. Pay a nachris means a wig. Regard to wig, if a woman has a wig, do we burn the wig of a woman of the righteous woman, of her wig as a possession that gets gathered into the city square and get burnt? So now the Gemara says, "Hey chidami." Okay, from here we see that in those days, for the wigs they had today, a wig is today we have like the more lesser wig, meaning to say that the women take them on and off. But those days there was the wig kind of more like what some people use for people that are bald, as opposed to using it for modesty, where they would glue it on. So the Gemara says, "Hey chidami, id mechuber begufa." If it's attached to her body, like in a way of glue or wax, so they actually put a substance to keep it on permanently, to hold the wig on. Kigufa dami, loy. So kigufa dami, then it should be considered like her body. So it's not a possession that gets gathered. Once it becomes glued onto the head, why would you think that we would take off the wig of the righteous woman and even surely the wicked woman who gets killed? gets beheaded, to burn it as a possession of that gets taken into the city square to be burnt. Like tzricha de talibe sifta, that it's hanging on a peg. There's different understandings. Hanging on a peg means seemingly hanging on a peg in the literal translation. In the simple translation is that she takes it on and off, and she hangs it on a shaitel head. A shaitel head is a wig, like women today have their wig styrofoam heads that they keep the wig on, right? So a wig that goes on and off basically. So because it's on and off, it's on the peg. So we should consider like any other possessions, even the righteous that get gathered into the city. So if the woman today women have more than one wigs, right? So if a woman has a few wigs, it's a possession. So she gets taken and gets burnt. Or do we say, even the oile v'nafik k'levushidami tekel? The Gemara doesn't have an answer. The Gemara says maybe because she enters and exits with it. I mean, she's constantly putting it on and off. So it's like a garment. It's not a possession. And a garment we don't burn. We don't burn clothing. So the Gemara says tekel. Tekel means we don't know. Okay, so from the simple explanation of the Gemara, Hazy, is that that Rav understands again. If not for the pasuk of Telusha, so then there's a thought that surely for the wicked woman and possibly for the righteous woman, you would shave their heads. But we have a limud that teaches us that it has to be available. You don't have to detach it. And if you have to detach it, then that's not even a question, it doesn't get burnt. So even the wicked woman, based on the answer or the question of Rava and his limud of the pasuk, even the wicked woman's here, like the Rambam Paskins, he quotes the Rambam, is not considered something that's usher by now, it's forbidden to take benefit from, and it does not get gathered to the city to be burnt. However, I mean, hypothetically, the woman that is from an Oved Avodah Zarah could be used as a wig. It doesn't say they can't, based on the Rambam. Is this the Rambam? Yeah, Rambam say from Hamada. Again, I don't know if anyone remembers, when was it, 10 years ago, when there was this whole thing about the women that were donating in India, they were donating their hair to Avodah Zarah. Similar idea, right? But in this case, we're talking about women who served idols. Do we shave off their heads? And we say no. But here we're talking about women that were donating or giving as I don't know, a way of sacrifice to the idols in India, to the churches that they had, and the church would sell the hair for business. So there was this whole uproar, and there were women were burning their shaitels here in Jerusalem. They're making, Lag BaOmer bonfires about it. But that's different because the actual hair was being given as a gift, what have you, to the idol worship. So, but here we're talking about a woman who served idols. Do we detach her hair and burn it? And the halacha that the Ram passes that you can take benefit from it. Okay. Doesn't have to be burnt. But the answer, but the wig itself that a woman has from the wicked women gets burnt, seemingly. And the question is about the righteous woman. Because Pernachris, Godil shows Cyrus the Alma Sha'oisin Lenoi. Means you have the hair that is made for beauty. Coming by the Rav Yosef Im Shatzit Sayu, if they were from the righteous, do they have to burn it or not? Okay, there's Nayui, there's other commentaries we're going to see in a second. There's Nayui, there's for beauty, and then there's also for cosmetics, meaning if Nayui means to say like, hair extensions or for beauty, or in the case of religious women so they could walk outside covering with, hair as opposed to having a kerchief. But there's also women who wear, unfortunately, if they're going bald, etc. And that's where the question comes in. So the Gemara says, if it's mechuber begufa shini kasher ba, that you tie it down to the body, kigufa dami, so then it's like part of her body. Just like we don't burn the clothing, because they're from the righteous. So we shouldn't grow this shaitel, this wig, because it's like a clothing. It's if they put it on properly, meaning they put it on. We'll see. Some commentaries say literally they would use wax, etc. So it says no. That's for sure not. The ones that are mamish attached to the head, not. The question is the tali b'sifta. If it's hanging on a peg, tali aiseg deal b'yased ve'en kaishin v'achshav. It's not tied on now. Seemingly to say that that they would when she would put it on, she would put it on with a strong substance. But right now it's not. Even the because she puts it on all the time. Again, seeming from Rashi is that we're talking about a wig that gets put on all the time in a way with like a glue or a wax. So even though now it's not on, She didn't put it on properly. Kol makom sheyasham nadin kimulavush is still be considered as a garment. Shaleh the kol shaita da'ata aleh ukashar malavushim dami. It should be considered because she's always taking it on and off like any other kind of clothing. So clothing don't get burned. So too the wig shouldn't get burned. Okay, this is what Rashi learns to understand the story of the wig. The other commentaries. Hey Danny, the other commentaries. The Orach writes. That's not talking about ibnoi. Necessarily means like to beautify, like an extra kind of like a kind of a beauty garment, but it's a woman, isha she'ein la rav seir, a woman who's losing her hair. Like so she would take hair from other people. Masima al roisha, and she would add it like almost. We're not talking about implants, but what would be equivalent to implants of those days. Shnira kamashu saira. The idea is that it should look as it's her hair. Ubiyadrma kosef peyas ser talush. But the Yad Ramah learns more like Rashi that it's not talking about that it's for like an implant of those days, but it's more like hana, something of beauty. So what does it mean the mechuber begufa? So that's connected to her head. So he writes from the Yad Ramah again, Kidech shenashim mechabris aitzim r'sheim b'shaiva v'zefes ebidav means that they would actually glue it or wax it into their head. So it was properly like today no one does that. I mean, I'm not talking about implants, but a woman who wears a beauty sheitel, it goes on and off with a clip. So the reason I'm mentioning it is because Rashi says when we say the sifta means a peg, but other commentaries we're talking about no, it's on her head. It says the Emek She'ela says that it's called a sifta with a pay, which means the Yad Ramah says that the peya is on her head, means the wig is on her head in both cases. The question is if she connects it with glue or wax, or does she have a clip? Today, anyone who's familiar with the women's wigs, today the wigs have clips, like a little like a clip that holds it into the hair. So the wig, the bottom, the inside of the wig connects to the woman's hair with a clip. So that, according to the Yad Ramah, that's the question. The question is that if it's on her head, but it's in a clip, it's connected by clip versus the glue or the wax. So maybe that's not a proper connection. So we kind of have different ideas of what this means, whether it's a beauty product, like the Aruch says, that you would actually glue the hair in, not like a beauty. It was a kind of hair implant of those days. So that would be the question. They would say no because it's part of her body, or are we talking about a wig that comes on and off, whether with glue or whether with a clip? Okay. So let's see what Rabbi Steinsaltz says on this subject here. Deriving benefit from a wig belonging to an inhabitant of the idolatrous city is forbidden. So here this is the idea of burning the wigs. It means if the wig itself belonged to an inhabitant of the idolatrous city, that means if she had a wig, as opposed to before the law that he said from the Rambam was, he quoted the Rambam about the hair belonging to a woman from an idolatrous city. But here we're talking about a wig, means that she owned the wig. Although the dilemma raised in the Gemara is not resolved, we don't resolve it. It says Teiku. It is forbidden based on the principle that every unresolved dilemma with regard to a prohibition by Torah law, meaning biblical, as opposed to rabbinic, the ruling is stringent, and therefore the Rambam says the wigs belonging to women of an idol worshipping city is forbidden, and therefore I guess that's the basis of what I said before. A few years ago, they were burning the wigs that came out of India. Okay. The Tali Besivta, some explain that when the Gemara speaks of a wig attached to her body, the reference is to a wig that was attached by means of wax and the like, meaning like almost glued down. When the Gemara speaks of a wig hanging on a peg, it's referring to a wig tied to a small peg that is fastened behind her ears, like I said, like the clips that they would put in, which till today, that's pretty much how the sheitel is being used. Again, it could be, I'm wrong, it could be, I'm not familiar with how it's being used for cancer patients. I just know my wife has a wig, my mother has a wig, so it's something I grew up with. But it could be for cancer patients, they do actually attach it much better than they do, let's say, with the woman that has hair. Okay. The Gemara continues. This is a continuation of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah says that one of the conditions is that you have to gather all the possessions, the shalala, to the rechayiv. Rechayiv means the square of the city. What happens if the city doesn't have a square? Tan Rabbanan, what happens? We learned Ein Lo Rechayv. A city has no main road, doesn't have a square, doesn't have a public space. So that's a condition. Ein Nasa Ir Hanidachas. So therefore, the pasuk says you have to gather it into the square of the city. There is no square, so fine. That city does not qualify for the laws of Ir Hanidachas, which mean whoever serves idols in that city gets stoned, a more severe punishment of death, but the possessions don't get destroyed and burnt, and the city doesn't get destroyed, and the possessions go to those who inherit them. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, Ein la rechav, if there's no square, that's just a technicality. So Oisin la rechav, just we make one. B'maika miflagi. What is the argument? So the Gemara says, Mar Savar, one holds, Rechayva me'ikara mashma. Mar Savar Rechayva hashtanami mashma. Rabbi Shmuel learns that it means that me'ikara, that the city had to be a city that had a square in it. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's just make sure there's a square when you're going to do what you do in the city that is an idol worship. If they don't have a square, make it. Okay, so the question basically is are we looking at what defines a city? Means the city, if it doesn't have a square, it's not really a city, or if it's mamish, just a technicality that you have to gather everything in the center of the city, so you make a center. That's Rabbi Akiva learns. Okay, Rashi says, you have to have a square initially in the city, before the whole story happened. It's not, you can't just decide that everyone in the city had all the qualifications of a city of idol worship. Warning, a majority of the residents, the citizens, all the conditions we said, Jews, not women, instigators, men instigators, all the conditions. There's only one problem. There's no square of the city. There's no central part of the city. So Rabbi Shmuel says that it's not a kind of city that we're talking about. It's a city that doesn't have a square. That's not a city. That's a neighborhood. That's a town. But if you want a proper city, it has to have a square. That's a definition. That's a sign. So if there's when I was with my grandfather and we were traveling through Europe right after the fall of communism, he went on a family trip, meaning he was going back to his roots. He came from Hungary. So we came from the city that he went, the city called Betarch, which is maybe, 20 minutes from Satmar. In Hungary, there was mamash a tiny city like that. It didn't have a square. They shared a square between two cities. It was like a dirt road that at the end of the city, there was a place, there was a kind of a little central area where there wasn't shops. There was just a bar and a pub and maybe a place to sleep for a few people. Mamash, what we call a krechma. It was like mamash ancient Europe, but it was kind of out of the city. You had to go, it was connected to cities. So that's not a city, according to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says it's mamish a technicality. And therefore we'll make the square, and then we'll bring all the possessions in the square and burn it. So we're here, let's see what Rabbi Steinsaltz says. Some explain that the dispute is with regard to the meaning of the term its square. According to Rabbi Shmuel, the reference is to a place that the inhabitants of the city are accustomed to utilizing as a square and a central area. Kind of, you have to remember, we spoke a few times that there's the idea of an idol city is not just dry technicalities of who instigates, how many people get instigated, is a majority, minority. This seems to be kind of a community question. How do we look at a community that's a communal kind of community situation that go into idol worship, and what do we want? How do we want to behave with such a city, right? How do we want to deal with such a city that the politics and the narrative of the city is around idol worship, is around negativity? So because it's based on it's a city that has a central area, part of the conditions of creating that central area is that makes it available for people to gather and talk their politics. And there's a place, I think, in London, so there's a square, I forgot what it's called, where everyone could gather and say whatever they want. You could say anything you want as long as you're not going to curse the queen or the king. So that a place like that is a place where people are going to say their narratives of idol worship. So that's a sign of what we're trying to deal with over here. Therefore, the building a square in the city is not sufficient to render that square its square, because doesn't have the things that cause the problem. Here you're trying to create the cause, although didn't exist in the first place. Rabbi Akiva understands the possessive term as a technical requirement only. Since there is a square that is now accessible to the inhabitants of the city, it's square. Rabbi Akiva says, okay, so What were we lacking? That the people were gathering somewhere else to instigate each other? Again, a square shows a sign of a community. When there's a square, that means people gathered together to the town square. So if there's no square, kind of everyone does their own thing. So how are you judging them as a community? Rabbi Kiva says it's mamash a technicality. If it doesn't have a square, it does not become an adulterous city, even if most of the residents of okay, I think this piece is going on the next. But so we might as well learn it because we have to go to the next. Talking about Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim does not become a city of Ir Hanidachas. It's not rendered as an adulterous city according to the Rambam. The reason is because we're going to see now in the Talmud that Yerushalayim it has to be a city that belongs to the tribes, not a city that belongs to all the tribes. It has to belong to a specific tribe, which is one of the conditions we learned in the Mishnah. Okay, let's again, that piece didn't belong where it was. It belongs after this piece of Gemara right here. Okay, this is a continuation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, what about the things that are hegdish? Every city has things that are not private. They belong to the temple, or they belong to hegdish is from the word kadosh. They're sanctified. So what do we do with those things? So we're going to have to figure out what is the question. So the Gemara just says the hegdesha sheba yipadu, the things that are set aside for temple use have to get redeemed. Means you don't burn it, you don't use it, it gets redeemed, and the monies go back to the value. We'll see in a second. Tanur Rabbanan, our rabbis have learned. Okay, so now we're going to go into this question about what do we do with the things of hegdish, things that belong to the temple or holy possessions. How do we deal with it in a city? Because we said we gather in all the shalol, all the spoils get gathered and burnt. So what do we do with the spoils and especially we include in that things that belong to righteous people? So the Gemara says, Tanur Rabbanan, rabbis have learned. We know there's different levels of things that are sanctified for the temple. There's sacrifices that are called Kodshe Kedashim, holy of holies. We'll see the definition. Rabbi Steinsaltz is going to define what that means. And we have Kodshe Mizbeach, things that are just sanctified for the altar, but parts of it get used for the person who's giving it. It means that you have certain sacrifices that only parts get burnt, but the rest the owners eat. You have Kodshe Kedashim that either get totally consumed, like an oila, or that get only eaten by the priest, like a chatas sacrifice, a sin sacrifice. The owner, the person who gives it, doesn't have any physical benefit, but the kohanim, the priest, eat it. Doesn't get totally consumed on the altar, but still called kodshe kedashim. Kodshe mizbeach means there's parts of it that go to the altar, and there's parts that get eaten by the person, like a shlamim or Passover. So the person who gives it, they eat most of the meat as part of the korban. So what do we do with kodshe kedashim, kodshe mizbeach yamusu? They have to be put to death. It means you can't redeem them and you can't burn them. So they separately get put to death because that's the only way to deal with them. We'll see in a second. Kodshe bedek habayis. What about things that have been set aside as donations for bedek habayis, which is that you donate things for the upkeep of the temple? It means it's not a sacrifice, but it's values that you that either monies or other valuables that the treasurer of the temple could use at their own will. I mean, they could sell it for anything, and the funds get used for the upkeep of the temple. So those things are not sanctified and dedicated to the altar. So they're initially given just as a value for the upkeep of the temples, and therefore you can't use them actually because they belong to a city of idol worship. But you could redeem them, and then by redeeming them, it kind of saves the value by transferring the value to something else, to money, let's say, and that way the value could stay with the temple, and then the item itself doesn't get used for the temple. I mean, we don't want to use the thing for the temple itself, even for the upkeep, because it was part of idol worship. But at the same time, it has value, so once we redeem it, its value gets transferred. What about trumais? Let's say you have trumas tithings. We'll see in a second who owns what tithings are we talking about. There's two options for the tithings. Option number one is that the tithings are still by the Israelite, the one who has to tithe, but he's going to or she's going to tithe. But so therefore you're not going to eat it. You have to give it to the Kohen, but you didn't give it to the Kohen yet. Or are we talking about the tithing that's been given to the Kohen, And let's say the Kohen is one of those people that also served idols, right? So what does he do? He was given tithings. So Yirakfu, you have to let them rot. Umaiser Sheni, what about second tithings? The second tithings is that first we give one tithing to the Kohen. Sorry, the Truma we give to the Kohen. Then we give Meiser 1/10, which goes to the Levite, in let's say in the way it should be properly, until Ezra kind of took that away from them. And then you have Meiser Sheni. Then you have Trumas Meiser also. You have to give Meiser from the Meiser as well. You have to give Meiser of the Meiser. But let's say then there's Meiser Sheni. Second tithings is from your first fruit, from your fruits that the owner eats, but has to eat it in Jerusalem. So Meiser Sheni, so what do you do with the second tithing? So it's for the owner keeps it, but the owner keeps it and has to bring it to Jerusalem. So what do you do with it? It's still holy. So what did we just burn it in the city square? Varakis Kodesh. Let's say someone who is one of the idol worshippers owned tefillin or owned holy books. What did we do with them? You take them as part of the shalal, as part of the spoils, and put it in the city square and burn it. So that you hide it. So there's the first tithings with truma, meaning has to be let to rot. Meiser Sheni goes into be with the holy articles, gets buried. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. It means the initial opinion of the Mishnah, of the Brisa. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, it says behemta. The Torah says to take all the animals that you own, and they have to be burnt they have to be destroyed with the spoils of the city. And from this we exclude v'loi behemes b'chor ma'aser. If you and again we have to see what Reb Shimon is talking about. This Mishnah has to be broken up to 1,000 pieces. This brisa, the Mishnah, but the behema of a firstborn, right? A firstborn animal goes to the Kohen, or the 1/10 belongs to the owner but has to be sacrificed. That's meiser, and that meiser has to go be sacrificed and it gets eaten. So what do we do with the animal of the firstborn and the meiser? Again, the question is who owns it. Where are we talking about? Are we talking about that the Kohen owns it, or we're talking about the Yisrael owns it? Is it blemished, non-blemished? There's a difference. If once it's blemished, it can't be sacrificed. How do you deal with it? Who eats it, etc. Shlala, some of the spoils, prat l'kesef hegdish v'kesef meiser, means only spoils that belong to individuals, but spoils that are monies dedicated for the temple, or monies that are for meiser sheni, because the law is basically, let's say a person lives, I don't know, in Metula, those days, or in Tveria, right? So go to Jerusalem and carry all your fruit, your second tithings to Jerusalem, schlep it in your car, and then start eating it over there is kind of difficult. So the Torah allows for a person to turn the meiser sheni into money, and then or valuables, and then take it and use the money has to be used in Jerusalem. So you have to use it for certain things. You can't use it for anything. You have to use it for certain foods in Jerusalem. But it saves you the idea of taking your actual fruit and schlepping it to Jerusalem. You could put it into money and then use the money in Jerusalem. Again, there's a person over here. He's one of the founders of Skype, in the initial founders of Skype. He became he's a Baal Tshuva, lives in Jerusalem, kind of in Jerusalem, and he's very into the monies that Jerusalem is getting when Mashiach comes, hopefully speedily in our time, when all these things happen again, second tithing, sacrifices. Jerusalem is going to be a bustling city that's going to need to be able to first have place for people to come in and out of to do things they have to do in Jerusalem and the temple. And second, there's going to be a huge economy of animals, foods, right? If someone comes in with $50,000 of second tithings, he or she's going to have to be able to spend it. There's going to have to be a tremendous amount of available foods and things to use your money on. So he has this big belief of the industry that's going to happen when Mashiach comes, and all the nations are going to come to Jerusalem. How Jerusalem is going to turn into such a huge city of commerce. He's talking about dollars and cents, not just the spirituality of Jerusalem. He's talking about the monies in Jerusalem, and he invested in that. He bought a whole bunch of hotels, etc. Okay, Rashi says, what about if the city of the idol worship city, has things that were predesignated to the altar? For instance, what's considered a kachim mizbeach? He says oilos, sacrifices that are totally consumed. So Rashi learns, what are we talking about? We're talking about the sacrifices, or the ashram. Ashram is a sin sacrifice for the wicked people that are in the city. So they're going to be killed and their possessions gets destroyed. We said that the verse says that the animals belonging to the wicked have to be killed by a sword. But this is not their animals. It's already been designated to the temple. This belongs to heaven. Yes, it's connected to the person, but you can't just say that it gets the same treatment as the rest of their cattle. At the same time, it's disgusting to sacrifice it, because they're wicked people who collectively, publicly served idols. So the Torah, the Mizbeach is not interested in their sacrifices. So what do we do with animals? Halal that these people that were pushed aside. From Rashi, it seems that there's no question about the animals that belong to the righteous. The righteous' possessions that are in the city gets destroyed. But if it's already designated to this temple, according to Rashi, there's nothing wrong with sacrificing their sacrifices. I mean, you could say that they lived in a neighborhood they shouldn't be living in, but you can't call it mi'isusa. It's disgusting, and they're rishayim, etc. They're going to quote a pasuk that zevach rishayim ta'eva, the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. This is not talking. They're not wicked. They're people that live. They're the minority that didn't serve idols. So Rashi seems to say that the question over here is only about the sacrifices of the wicked that get killed. Hilkach yamusu. So therefore, there's nothing you could do. You can't sacrifice them, and you can't kill them like you would kill the rest of the cattle. So you musin, you let them die. What does it mean you let them die? So here it's kind of controversial what Rashi says based on other commentaries. Rashi says that they get treated like there's a certain, we've learned this before in Sanhedrin, that we have the 4 death penalties. We have misim midei shemayim. We have people that do certain things that the Torah, they don't qualify to be killed according to this 4 death penalties, but they get put into an isolated space and they get fed foods that would cause them to die. Meaning, yamusu, how? You put them in an isolated place, and you overstuff them with barley, that until basically the stomach explodes. It's a way of dying. I'm not sure why that's more pleasant than the 4 deaths, but that's also done to people. So a lot of commentators say that we don't find that there's no mucker, there's no source. The Rashi should say that we treat animals that way. There's people that get treated that way as a way of a certain sign of so to say unwritten death sentence. But there's no source to say that we treat animals that way. We're going to learn. So the question would be, why can't we just redeem them? Because they're animals that belong to the wicked, so they can't be redeemed. The Gemara is going to address that question. Shinemar, Kolil Hashem Alikecha, Reb Shimon Aimer Lekamam Farshtaima. Okay, we're going to learn what Reb Shimon, again, what Reb Shimon is saying, also we need to be understood. I just want to bring that before we learn Reb Steinsaltz here. He says, according to the Rishash, I'm not sure how the Rishash argues in Rashi, he's in Nachron, he says, the Rishash says that that there's no makar, there's no source where Rashi says to feed them the barley and that they should, because it's kind of feeding them death, as opposed to the Rishash says, he agrees, the Gemara says they die, but that you just get starved. So I'm not sure which is worse, starved to death or fed barley to death, but either one, the Rashi says they get fed the barley, and the Rishash says they just get starved to death. And we find that again, it's not about our animal cruelty, but there's certain sacrifices that if they can't get sacrificed, not just the Ir Hanidachas, that the animals get held in a situation where they're starved to death. Okay. Oh, sorry, I missed that. There's a question here in the chat. So Z quoted about the place where you could speak your opinions in London. All right. So Rashi says like this: Kachim Mizbeach Musu. Since it's prohibited to wound an animal, consecrated for the altar, you can't wound it, because if you wound it, then you disqualify it for the altar. You're not allowed to intentionally wound an animal, and to cause it to become blemished. Its death is caused by confining it to a room and depriving it of food. So Rashi, the Reb Steinsaltz, doesn't take Rashi's opinion, he takes the Rashash's opinion that it gets deprived of food, a nice way of saying starved, as opposed to being fed the barley. So Reb Shimon says that when it says behemta, not the behema, we're going to see the Gemara has to explain. But first he's going to explain what is a bechor and what is meiser. What does it mean, an animal of the firstborn and an animal of the tithings? So he explains like this. The male firstborn of cattle, sheep, or goats that belong to a Jew is sacred from birth and must be given to the priest. The priest then sacrifices it in the temple, again, provided that it doesn't have a blemish. And the priest and their family may partake in the flesh. So that goes to the priest. He has to sacrifice it. It's a whole. We're not learning it now. The Gemara B'chayros deals with it because the priest. You have to remember this is a business. I mean, imagine you're a priest and you're getting the firstborn animals, and then you have to schlep it every time to the temple to sacrifice it. So they weren't really trustworthy to make sure that they wouldn't actually blemish it themselves. Because for them it was much easier if there was a blemish, and then they don't have to take it to the temple. If a firstborn animal becomes blemished and disqualified for sacrifice, it may be slaughtered and eaten like any other non-sacred kosher animal. With one difference, it still has to be given to the priest. So the priest gets the firstborn anyways. The difference if it's blemished, then it's just his possession. You could slaughter it, but it's not sacred, but it belongs to the priest. So that's the firstborn. We're going to see the significance of the blemish or not, because it comes back into what Reb Shimon's talking about. Is the animal that we're talking about in the city of Ir Hanidachas, we're talking about a blemished firstborn or a non-blemished firstborn, etc. But first we have to know what we're dealing with as far as the law goes. What is meiser behema, animal tithe? On 3 occasions each year, the owner of a herd of kosher animals was required to gather all of the animals born during the preceding period into an enclosure. There's the whole idea of meiser. There's a whole system that is all the laws. They get in the closure. They go out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You hit the 10th one with the marking, and that's tithing. Okay. So during proceeding into the enclosure and let them out one by one, the animals passed under the shepherd's rod, right? Leviticus 27, and every 10th animal was marked with a red paint to indicate that it was an animal tithe and sacred. If it was fit to be sacrificed, the animal tithe was brought to the temple and sacrificed in a manner similar to that of the peace offering, which is a shlamim. Its blood was sprinkled on the altar and its meat was eaten by its owner. So unlike the firstborn that goes to the priest, the owner eats the first tithing, but has to bring it to the temple for sacrifice, but not by the priest. The details of the halachos of animal tithings are elucidated in tractate Bechoros. Okay. Kachek, what is holy sacrifice? Offspring of the most sacred order. So it says burnt offerings, sin offerings. So burnt offerings is the olah. Sin offerings is the chattis. Guilt offerings is the osham. And communal peace offerings are included in this category. It means even though it's a peace offering, it's a shlamim, but it's communal, not private. The following regulations apply specifically to these sacrifices. They are slaughtered only in the northern section of the temple. That's number 1. We say this every day in the Ezimim Koimim, right? Those offerings that are eaten in the courtyard. Those offerings that are eaten, meaning not the burnt offerings, may be eaten only on the day the animal is sacrificed. It means you're only given 1 day, and the night following that day. They may be eaten only by male priests and only within the temple courtyard. So that's eaten by the priest same day and night, and have to be eaten in the temple itself. The prohibition against misuse of consecrated property applies to these offerings from the moment they are consecrated. As soon as you make them hegdish, they no longer belong to the person. Once their blood is sprinkled on the altar, the prohibition against misappropriation continues to apply to the portions of the offering that are not that are to be consumed on offerings that are to be consumed on the altar, but not the portions of the offering that are to be eaten. Okay. So the question is, how long does the hegdish stay on what parts of the animal? Okay, let's go a little further. Amar Mar, we learned before. If the city has in it kachek kachim, which we just described, best kachek kachim means the most sacred. That means that if it's eaten only in the temple, only by the male priest, etc., only for 1 day. Some of them don't get eaten at all, which is the burnt offerings, the olah. So kachim is be'echin musa, and if it's just if it's things that are designated for the altar, meaning which we're going to learn. I'm not sure why he didn't describe what it is, but it's anything that's not included in list number 1. gets put to death. And we said Yamusu means, according to Rashi, put into a confined space and fed barley, and others say just starved. Okay. But my Yamusu. So the Gemara says, why should they be put to death? What did they do wrong? They don't belong to a person. Yiru ad shista'avu, v'yimkru v'yikul d'meil l'nedava. Let them sit and pasture until they get a blemish, and means they're unfit for the offering anymore. So you're not putting an offer. You're not offering a wicked person's offering on the altar because it's not going to be offered because it's no longer qualified. Sell it, so now changes ownership, and the money could go as a donation to the temple. And then they can use it for different things. They can use it as to buy other sacrifices or to upkeep. So the Gemara has an argument now between Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish. Why do we have to put to death these animals as opposed to letting them pasture until they become disqualified? If you leave an animal long enough, that was also part of the question. You had to check that you didn't trust the Kohen. The Kohen would feed it foods or put it in places where they could say, we didn't do anything. The goat ripped its lip because it was trying to eat from sharp thorns. So there's differences if you put the animal in this situation, that animal is surely going to be blemished, or even most animals, you leave it long enough, it's going to get a blemish. So Rabbi Yochanan says, or it becomes disqualified for other reasons. Age could be a disqualification. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Zevach Hashem Te'eva. That this is the question is, why is it still considered a Zevach Hashem once it's redeemed? But Rabbi Yochanan says it's still considered the sacrifice of the wicked, and there's a verse that says that the sacrifice of the wicked is a To'eva, is an abomination, and therefore we can't even benefit from its value, from its money. Rish Lakish says, Mamin Bailamu. It remains the money of the person who donates it. And we just said all the property of what's donated has to be destroyed. You can't destroy it in the way you destroy other animals or possessions because it's been sanctified. So we have to destroy it in another way. But it's considered Mammon Bailam. Therefore, it's the money of the Bailam, and you can't use it. Because the money of the Bailam, the money of the owners of the wicked, have to be destroyed. Again, the Gemara hasn't explained why we're only talking about the wicked. Okay. And the point is that what makes it still an ownership by the person who donates it is if we're talking about the type of sacrifice, something that was sanctified for the temple, that you are obligated to take responsibility for. Sometimes we have certain sacrifices or donations you give to the temple that if something goes wrong, you have to replace it. So as long as the fact that you have responsibility, you have an achrayus, shows that you still have an ownership in it, right? This applies to a lot of things. For instance, when they would collect the half coins, at what point does the person who give the half coin still have a responsibility if the money gets stolen or lost on the way to the temple? They have collectors who had collected. What happens is, at what point does a person, when you donate something, no longer responsible for how it works out? So we're talking about a kind of sanctification that you have achrayus, you have responsibility, and that responsibility is an indication of your ownership, and therefore it can't be even sold or redeemed after it comes disqualified, and the money is being used for the upkeep of the temple because your ownership is still involved. And Rabbi Yochanan says differently. It's not because you have ownership. He still calls it an abomination because it started from you as a wicked person. Reb Shimoni, this is according to Reb Shimon, the Amar, Mammon Bailmu. And a case where you have a responsibility to the prophet, to the sacrifice, Reb Shimon says, again, we're going to have to see how this works with the Reb Shimon of the Mishnah. But Reb Shimon says that there's a responsibility, and that's considered Mammon Bailam. It's the money of the person who donates the sanctification. And in this case, the person who donated it, although it's already been designated for the temple or for the altar, for the altar, either Kachek Kadashim or just Kachim Mizbeach, nevertheless, the fact that you're responsible for it means you have an ownership in it, and therefore you can't sell it. It's your money, and your money has to be destroyed because you're a person of the person who we're talking about in question is a person that was one of the wicked who served idols in the city we're talking about only Ir Hanidachas. If this would be a private person who served idols, anyways, their property goes to the Yarshim, so it wouldn't make a difference if it was sanctified to go to the temple. If it gets sacrificed is another question. Okay. Zevach Rishayim Te'eva, Fil Demei Maser. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says, even the monies is an abomination. And therefore, even if you were to redeem it and use the money, because its origin is from the person who's a wicked person who served idols in a public setting, so to say, in an Ir Hanidachas, in a city of idol worship. So we don't want anything to do with it. As long, no matter how many times he's trying to whitewash it, because its origin is from this wicked person, it's an abomination. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Reb Shimon the Omer Ba'azav, Reb Shimon says that if a person has responsibility, Hazav is a Perek in Baba Mitzio, that that if there is something that you designate to the temple and you are responsible if something goes wrong, Ma'amin Bailamu, Reb Shimon says that means the fact that the responsibility is an indication that the money still belongs to the person who's giving it. And there's halacha means it applies to the laws of oina, meaning when you have overcharging or undercharging, etc. It's hilkach le'inin Ir Hanidachas nami mami. Therefore, when it comes to the question of the city of idol worship, it's also considered their money, and therefore you can't use it. It's a value that you can't use for the temple. Meaning to say, the Reish Lakish argues Rabbi Yochanan not to say that it's a question of an abomination. It's pashat your money, and the monies of the people who worshipped idols is it has to be destroyed. And it says it has to be destroyed by the sword. Kasharbeim is like any animal. Therefore, the money is also prohibited and value. So if that's the case, why don't we just kill all the animals? Like we would kill why don't we kill the sacrifices, the animals that have been designated for sacrifice, like you kill the rest of the animal if you're saying it's the money of the Bailam. We can't. Just because they've been designated, we're talking about it's been designated before the verdict, because they've been designated for heaven, and it's not respectful to treat something that's been designated for the temple like you treat the rest of the animals, so they get killed in another way. They don't get destroyed by sword in a public setting like you destroy the shalol, the spoils of the city. But it belongs to the owner, and therefore it can't be used in any way or form for the temple. This is not an easy Gemara. So let's go a little further. So we quoted Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon says that Mammon Bailim. Therefore, what does that mean? That any sacrifice, according to Reb Shimon, if you have a chrayas, if you have responsibility, belongs to the owner, and therefore it has to, like Rashi says, it has to be destroyed. Technically, it should be destroyed like anything else you own, but as a respect to heaven, we destroyed something else. But if you remember the beginning of the Mishnah, Reb Shimon the Bechlal argues. Reb Shimon says that the Behemta is only coming to exclude Bechar Maisim. And Shalal and spoils is coming to exclude monies of Hegdish and Meiser. So how does what's Reb Shimon have to do with what we just said before? That he quoted it saying that that monies belong to the owner. So how many say for Reb Shimon Reish Lav Reb Shimon? So the very fact that the second part of the Mishnah is Reb Shimon, and seeming to say, we'll see later, we're not getting into what is the argument between Reb Shimon and the Tanna Kama, but the very fact that Reb Shimon says the second part of the Mishnah means he disagrees with the first part of the Mishnah. So how could we quote Reb Shimon as a source of reason why we're destroying the animals? We're destroying the animals because Reb Shimon says you have a responsibility, therefore it's Mammon Bailim, it belongs to the owner. But Reb Shimon doesn't agree with that whole statement in the Mishnah because he argues on that Mishnah. So how many say Reb Shimon here, Reish Lav Reb Shimon? So the initial statement of the Mishnah is not according to Reb Shimon. So why do we kill the animals? The whole reason we kill the animals according to Reish Lakish is because the value of the animal belongs to the owner, meaning the sinner who served idols. But that statement is based on Reb Shimon, who disagrees with the statement of the Mishnah. So it can't be, how does it go together? So therefore the Gemara says, no, we're talking about Kachim Kalim. We're not talking about the most sacred sacrifices. Again, we have to understand, when the Gemara says that, what about the sacred sacrifices? Kachim Kalim means light sacrifices. We'll see in a second what defines that. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Kachim Kalim Mammon Bailim. That Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that light sacrifices, which are sacrifices that are not severe, meaning they are eaten by the owners, they have more time, like a Passover sacrifice, so not eaten by the Kohen. So that's really the money of the owner, because the owner's is eating it, and it's still his or hers. So then what about the something that's been sanctified for as holy of holies, meaning it's only eaten by the Kohen or totally consumed by the altar? You can't use it on the temple because it belonged to the wicked, but the money is already totally disconnected from the owner and Yipaduk. Meaning to say, so we shouldn't go too fast. We have a mission that says like this. Let's just break it down. We have different types of things that get designated for the temple. You have kachik kachim and kachik kalim. Kachik kachim is severe, so to say, very holy sacrifices, like we quoted, sin sacrifices, guilt sacrifices, communal sacrifices, olas, total consumed sacrifice. Basically, once the owner gives it or the community gives it, they take no part in it. If it's consumed totally, then of course. But even if it's eaten, it's only eaten by the kohanim. It's nothing to do with the owner. The owner totally, so to say, almost disconnected from it, seemingly. So therefore, there's no reason why, once it's been designated to the temple on such an extreme level, that we should kill it. Maybe we don't sacrifice it because it came from a wicked person, but there's no reason we shouldn't be able to redeem it. So if we're going to go according to Reb Shimon, like the initial statement of the Gemara, so according to Rabbi Yochanan says it's an abomination is an abomination, end of story. Rish Lakish says it's Mammon Bailim. It belongs to the owner. But it doesn't belong to the owner. It would only belong to the owner if you're going to take the opinion of Reb Shimon. That says that if you take responsibility to make sure that it makes its way to the temple, if not, you have to give a second donation, money or animal. So that shows a level of ownership, even though you don't touch the animal afterwards, you don't eat it, it gets eaten by the Kohanim. But we can't say it's Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon disagrees with that whole statement of the Mishnah. So therefore, we have to fall back on Rabbi Yossi Galili, who doesn't agree with Reb Shimon that holy of holy sacrifices, so to say, you have a responsibility it's considered mammon bailim, money of the giver, so to say, of the person who donates it, even if you have responsibility. So the mission, what's the mission talking about? It's talking about light sacrifices that the owner eats, etc. And the light sacrifices, that's surely mammon, that's the money of the giver, so to say. All right, let's see what Rashi says, and we'll learn the Reb Steinsaltz, and we're in the middle of the sentence. We will stop and continue next week. Okay. So Rashi says, Rabbi Yossi Galili, this has different than Reb Shimon about what level of ownership does a person have when you sacrifice something, when you give something to the temple. So Rabbi Yossi Galili says in the first chapter of Baba Kama, what does it mean to take, so to say, me'ilah, to take benefit from a sacrifice? L'Rabbis, it comes to include kadashim kalim shehemim moinai, that a person is not allowed to take benefit from a sacrifice, even from light sacrifices, that's considered your money. So because it's your money, and now we're going back to this case of the Ir Hanidachas, the city of idol worship, you donated, let's say, a Passover sacrifice, and that's considered a light sacrifice, and it's your money, it's considered according to basically, so you can't sacrifice it. So therefore it has to be, and it's considered your sacrifice, your animal, and if it's your animal, it has to be destroyed. The only thing is, as respect to heaven, we destroy it in a more respectful way, let's say. Avakotche Kedashim, but something that's totally sanctified. Amai Yiru, the Havadi Heim Atzam Einin Kraven, the Zevach Hashem Tev. I mean, even Rish Lakish agrees, you can't sacrifice it. Means the question of the argument, we're going to see the Gemara is going to ask the argument to Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. But from Rashi here we see that according to Rabbi, even Rish Lakish agrees to actually sacrifice the animal that was donated, even if he gave it as an oila, total holy of holy sacrifice, meaning it's totally given over to the temple, you have no ownership in it, it's still considered an abomination to sacrifice it. But you have no ownership in it, so why should we kill it? Eliyiru, you let it pasture, Achi Istavu, until it becomes disqualified for whatever reason, V'yimchru, and then you could sell the animal, because now it changes ownership, and the temple retains the value, and then it gets whitewashed, so to say, through the donation, and now the value would stay with the temple, but we wouldn't sacrifice it because it could be considered an abomination. Okay, let's just finish this with Reb Steinsaltz, and we have to remember what we learned now because we're going to be in continuation on that statement from next week when we continue. But let's just define what is Kedoshim Kalim, what is lesser sanctity. So this category includes the various types of individual peace offerings. So a peace offering is a shlamim that was given by an individual. Before we said a communal is considered kachim. The thanks offering, a toda, the Nazareth ram, the male firstborn of a kosher animal, means that when the Kohen gives it, that's considered kachim kalim, even though, let's say, it stays unblemished, and the Kohen brings it to be sacrificed. It's not just because a Kohen is eating it. It's not the same kind of Kohen that's eating it with the same restrictions as the holy sacrifices that have to be eaten on one day in the temple courtyard. Animal tithes, which is the ma'aser we talked about before. Paschal lamb. These offerings may be slaughtered anywhere in the temple, so it's not in the north part of the temple courtyard. The time permitted for consumption of the meat varies between offerings, but it's more time given than, say, the 24 hours. They may be eaten by the priest as well as by their wives, children, and servants, so not just the male priest, and the exception of the offerings of the firstborn animal by the people bringing the sacrifice. So parts of it go to the priests and their extended family and servants and their interests, and part of it goes to the owner. And any ritual pure circumcised individual that they invite. So you can invite, you don't have to just be the owner. As long as you're not an orel, you're not uncircumcised. So when we're talking about servants, we're talking about circumcised servants. So then you could eat from the sacrifice. One is not required to partake of them in the temple courtyard. Again, it doesn't get eaten in the temple, but they must be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. So there's more space. Again, this person who's invested in Mashiach, and I want to invested in the times of Mashiach, Yemais Mashiach, so was telling me about the animals. There's going to be so many animals, and where are you going to cook the animal, right? We talk about it like, so someone brings a sacrifice, and they give them 40 pounds of meat. So they go, invite them, make a party. What are you going to do? What are you doing with 40 pounds of meat? So there are people obviously to service them. You went to the restaurants didn't have their own meat. You came to the restaurant with your meat. You bring your own bottle of wine, and the restaurant prepared a whole dish and a service and a meal, etc. The prohibition against the misuse of consecrated property applies only to those portions of the offering consumed on the altar, and only after the blood has been sprinkled on the altar. Okay, let's stop here, and we will continue with this line of learning next week. As Hashem Yisbarach. Again, we're getting closer to the end. Hopefully, in the next few weeks, we will finish Sanhedrin and make some figure.